Hello and welcome everyone. We Weeb online, and today I'm going to continue the story What If Hinata Was an Empress Part 2. This is the end of the story, and if you enjoy this video, please give it a big thumbs up and subscribe to the channel and turn that bell notification on if you never want to miss an upload. Now wasting no more time, let's begin.
Naruto was lying in bed, a woman on each side of him, the sheets drenched in sweat. He couldn't figure out how a simple breakfast had devolved into a scene worthy of the most hardcore book Jiraiya could ever dream of writing. He could feel Hinata's head above his heart with a smile on her face, Fu's head buried in his neck, and hell, he could feel his manhood hardening from the still foreign but very pleasurable sensation of two pairs of breasts being pressed against him. Hinata, to his surprise, seemed to notice it as well. Naru-kun, again, you're insatiable, god. It's not my fault. I've got two naked goddesses pressing up against me. Flattering will not get you anywhere. Hinata laughed before resting her head on his heart. I'm too tired to look after you right now. I think I'll take a nap. Yeah, yawn, I'm the same way. What about you, Fu-chan? He turned to find the mint-haired beauty fast asleep, nuzzled against him. Naruto smiled as he laid his head on the pillow, closing his eyes and drifting off to sleep. As a breathless and triumphant Toad Sage entered the room, the door slid open, slamming against the wall. I tracked her down. This immediately reawakened the three people in the bed, and Jiraiya was on the verge of death. Hinata had gathered nature chakra, fashioned it into ethereal-looking throwing knives, and was ready to throw them in the time it took him to scream in pride. Fu had unsealed her bow from God knows where, and Naruto had taken the kunai hidden under his pillow, even though the three of them were still in bed, and the two women's hands were paralyzed from covering their chests with sheets. Jiraiya was still on the verge of death, and if he didn't come up with a good reason, he'd soon shake hands with the Grim Reaper. But then, he was Jiraiya the super pervert, and even if he was about to die, he'd perv. So he took out his notepad with a lecherous grin. Hinata was not happy about this. Jiraiya took a closer look at her after she nailed the notepad to the wall with a flick of her wrist. Then he started sweating. Hinata scowled, her eyes red from the dark red markings that had appeared around her eyes, lending a feral touch to her delicate beauty. Two red ghostly antlers, resembling those of a dragon, rose from her hair, and, while the knives in her hand appeared insignificant, they had just demonstrated their lethal power. The Sanin's Jiraiya, if you place any value on these things between your legs, you will remain silent about my identity, and will not include any of this in one of your books. Is that clear? Crystal gulps. I'll be waiting for you in the living room. That is, if you prefer, I can return later. No, go into the living room. You ruined our nap mood, so we might as well hear what you have to say. Naruto grumbled, clearly annoyed by the interruption. Hinata gave Jiraiya a sour look before turning to Naruto. I'm going to take a shower while you talk to the perv. Will you join me, Fu-chan? Yeah, who knows, Naru-kun, if you're quick enough, you might join us as well. Fu winked and giggled as she grabbed her yukata before looking toward the door, where Jiraiya was staring at them, drool streaming from his grinning mouth. A vein appeared on Fu's brow. You'd better be in the living room before I get up, or Heim Threat Chan's will seem like a walk in the park in comparison to what I'll do to you. Jiraiya had vanished from the doorway as soon as she closed her mouth. Fu got out of bed, put her clothes on loosely, as did Hinata, and walked to the bathroom with a satisfied smile. Naruto stood up, quickly dressed, and went to the living room, where he sat in front of his perverted godfather. All right, so what exciting news do you have for me? Well, it's a little late now, but I came to tell you that I had found your little Hyuga, but it appears that she has also discovered you. Yeah, is there anything else? Well, I thought you'd be interested, and I wasn't expecting her to be there. Just so you know, I saw the Hyuga on the way, and Hayashi is becoming agitated. Your little girlfriend should talk to him or there will be trouble. She'll deal with him whenever and however she wants. I'll try to advise her, but the final decision is hers. Jiraiya gave a nod. His gaze was drawn to some discarded pastries. Do you have any plans for these? I skipped breakfast. Please assist yourself. I'm off to take a shower. Put an end to that train of thought right there. Naruto entered his room without another word, leaving Jiraiya pouting. After evicting the perverted sage, the three realized they had spent the entire morning having fun together and decided to eat lunch. Hinata insisted on cooking, and with Fu's encouragement, Naruto agreed to try her food for himself. To say Naruto adored her cooking would be the millennium's understatement. After lunch, Hinata agreed to meet with the Hyuga representatives on her own terms. That is, with her face concealed and her two lovers nearby to assist in restraint if necessary. Naruto went to find the three Hyuga after the room was prepared, leaving Hinata and Fu to talk. So, what do you intend to tell them? I'm not sure. They are my family, but their rules have been detrimental to me. I'm at a loss for what to do. To be honest, I was hoping to avoid this meeting. Yeah, but don't you think your sister would like to know how you're doing? I'm not sure. We didn't talk much. I'm not even sure she understands what family is. They were always so cold. They have been for several years. What could have happened in just 6 years? A lot can happen. Take a look at yourself. Do you really believe you would have done what we did this morning 6 years ago? The mint-haired lady laughed. Hinata gave Fu a disapproving look. We were 13 years old. You understand what I mean. If you introduced yourself to your 13-year-old self, she would most likely try to hide behind something. Is it so difficult to believe that they might care? Do you remember what Naruto said? He told us Hayashi had followed every lead he could find, even getting his leg crushed in the process. And he shattered any hope of happiness I had as a child. That man must account for 8 years of hell. You should be aware by now. Forgiveness is not something I freely give, especially to those who have hurt me. Besides, I don't believe you have any advice for me on this matter. Or do I need to remind you of how you told your father to fuck off this morning? It's not quite the same. How so? He ruined your childhood. My father did the same thing. He's lucky I let him speak at all. My father evicted me when I was 4 years old. I doubt Hayashi did the same. And, while he did beat you up on a regular basis, you never left this training on the verge of death. Am I mistaken? Fu, I made my decision. They should have been concerned while I was still in Konoha. How about Naruto? He was concerned. He stood up for me during the Chunin exams. Is it certain it wasn't his sense of justice? Are you certain he would not have done that for anyone else? Hinata tried to respond, but nothing came out of her mouth. As she glared at her wife, her rage began to boil. But it vanished as quickly as it appeared, and Hinata's gaze lowered. So, do you believe he pretends to love me? All of this would be a lie to keep you from hurting me. Former Hyuga whispered. Fu began to panic and rushed to console the depressed Empress. Of course not. You already know he adores you. I'm sorry, I didn't use the appropriate words. That is to say, you never realize how valuable something is until you lose it. People are the same way. What I'm attempting to say is, everyone you knew, including your clan, was shocked when you were exiled, so they probably miss you. At the very least, give them a chance. Fu, I get it, but if I had to give them another chance, why didn't you do the same for your father? Because he couldn't care less. Taki didn't even lift a finger after I left, so I had some time to gather some information. They didn't care where I was until Iwa threatened them with a border incident. They desire my power, not me. But your father does not want to force you back into Konoha. He simply wants to improve your life. How? He believes you still have the seals and wishes to remove them. Hinata took a deep breath to relax. Okay, I'll try to remain calm. Someone was knocking on the door right now. Naruto's head poked in as the door slid open. They've arrived. Hinata put on her veil after taking one more deep breath. Please send them in. Naruto nodded and stepped inside, fully opening the door for the 3 Hyuga. She noticed several things now that she had time to examine them carefully. Her father's limp and cane, as well as the fact that Hanabi was assisting him in walking, were the first things she noticed, followed by the change in her father's hair color. It was surprising because a Hyuga's hair usually grayed around the age of 65-70. But her father, who was only in his mid-50 seconds, looked as old as her grandfather the last time she saw him. She was taken aback by how defeated and exhausted Hayashi appeared. Then she realized how much Hanabi had grown. She had left a 9-year-old girl for a 15-year-old Chunin. Her brown hair was still long, falling to the small of her back, and she was dressed in a cream kimono with a dark blue sash to keep it closed, a headband tied around her neck, and a fishnet shirt visible near her throat. The outfit was completed by dark blue pants and black sandals. Neji kept his hair long and his headband on his forehead, but he now wore a cream kimono top and pants, as well as a black man's skirt, or perhaps an apron. Hinata had to stifle a laugh when she saw this. Hyuga Neji, I had heard about your abilities but not about your attire. Cross-dressing must be frowned upon in such a strict and traditional clan. Your life must be extremely difficult, teased the veiled Empress in a mock compassionate tone, causing the Jonin to blush furiously and sputter denials while Hanabi snickered not so subtly. This piqued Hinata's interest. When did Hanabi start acting like this? Hayashi, on the other hand, had something else on his mind, and instead of paying attention to his daughter teasing his nephew, he began to kneel, struggling to suppress a grunt of pain. But it was enough for his daughters to notice and Hanabi to rush to his side. Father, you should not be putting that much strain on your knee. Hanabi, I'll go to any length to ensure Hinata's safety. If that means I have to suffer a little longer, so be it. Hanabi, seeing her father's obstinacy, sighed and assisted him in kneeling. Hayashi was soon joined by his daughter and nephew, and they all bowed to the ground as one. The aged clan head then addressed the Empress before him, his head still on the ground. Madam Empress, I am grateful that you are listening to us, because I do not deserve such respect. I'm sure Hinata told you about my failure as a father. It's a blunder I'd like to correct as much as possible. Hinata was given 2 seals, one preventing her from having children under the penalty of death, and the other allowing any member of our clan's main branch to execute her. I'd like to get rid of these seals. I am not requesting her return to the clan. Instead, I would like you to inform her that we have a method to remove them. Lord Jiraiya of the Sannin researched these seals and devised methods to remove them. I beg you, Naruto-san, please inform her of our good intentions. I know she probably doesn't want to see me again, but please let her sister and cousin know how much they miss her. And I do as well. Hayashi spoke in a subdued but controlled tone until the end, when his voice cracked and his words were tainted by sorrow. Hinata was at a loss for words and didn't know what to do until one thought came back to her. You mentioned removing the caged bird seal. What about the branch family? This time, her response came from Neji, the Jonin, untying his headband and revealing a seal-free forehead. Your Highness, there is no longer any branch, only the Hyuga. Though the Elder's treachery caused us great pain, it also provided us with an opportunity to make things right. The man cracked a bitter smile. Hinata eventually freed us from our shackles, but the cost was too high. Please let us relieve her pain as she did ours. Hinata had to fight to keep herself in line by this point, but she kept her emotions in check and turned her gaze to her sister. What are your reasons? Hyuga Hanabi. I don't need another reason. She's my sister, and she's in pain. But, if you're really curious, I wasn't the best sister to Hinata, and I want to make amends. All I want is for my sister to be happy. Please allow us to assist her. Hinata tried to stay calm, but tears threatened to fall from her eyes. Fu and Naruto had told her that her family missed her, but her pain and anger prevented her from believing them. But when she saw them like that, she couldn't deny it any longer. She stood up, veil removed, and made her way to her family on shaky legs. The 3 Hyuga did not see her face because their heads were still bowed. They only looked up when they heard her voice. You've evolved. You've all changed a lot. When they heard the Empress's voice, they looked up hesitantly, gasping when they saw the uncovered face of one Hyuga Hinata. Hayashi couldn't believe it, so he activated his Byakugan to confirm what he saw. And it was his estranged daughter who stood before him. As relief washed over him, tears began to fall. His daughter was unharmed. Hinata knelt in front of him and hugged him. Hayashi began to hug her again, cradling his long-lost child and softly rocking. Hinata, you're safe. Thank you, God. I'm so sorry, my daughter. Please forgive this old fool for his transgressions. Yes, Father, I forgive you. Sob, I forgive you. Hanabi, who was kneeling nearby, was quickly incorporated into the hug, crying as hard as her father and sister. Neji stood there, patiently waiting his turn to hug his cousin. He wanted to hug her right away, but he knew he needed to let Hayashi and Hanabi enjoy this family moment. On the side, Naruto and Fu smiled as they watched the reunion. That went even better than I had hoped, said Fu. Yeah, at the very least, they are now at peace. The mint-haired lady agreed with a hum. A soft knock on the door was heard unexpectedly. Man, this is really awkward. What am I going to tell him? I'm pretty sure he'll forgive me, but I can't help but worry he'll be too angry at me. Shit, it's too late to go back now. Kiba and Yuzuka hesitantly looked at Naruto as the door slid open. Hello, Naruto. Could we please talk for a moment? Before turning back to him, the blonde looked behind him, soft sobbing sounds coming from within. My house isn't really available, I'm afraid, but I suppose we could walk a little. As Naruto was walking out of the house, a hand appeared on his shoulder, frowning. I don't think it's a good idea, Naruto. The guy clearly enjoys inflicting pain on you. The blonde responded with a huge smile, similar to the ones he used to give at the academy. Don't worry, he didn't hit me this time. He just wanted to talk. Kiba frowned slightly. I've been a jerk on this one. Damn. The Shichibai Jinchuriki released Naruto's shoulder but didn't seem reassured, glaring at Kiba before retreating inside the house. Naruto started walking, and Kiba followed, unsure how to start this conversation. The Inuzuka was relieved that Naruto didn't press him, but he had no idea where to start. Oh, screw that. I'd rather face it head on. I apologize. Naruto came to a halt, surprised. Would you please excuse me? I expressed my regret. My actions over the years have been unjustified. I've been a total jerk, blaming you for something that wasn't your fault. I apologize. I know I've probably gone too far to be forgiven, but I should at least apologize. Kiba lowered his gaze to the ground, bracing himself for a refusal. He looked up when he felt Naruto's hand on his shoulder, and to his surprise, Naruto was smiling at him. It makes no difference. To be honest, I was blaming myself equally, and I had to have my buttocks nearly kicked to let go of the grief. Oh, and find out what happened to Hinata-chan. Kiba realized he had been wrong all these years when a happy smile appeared on his face. Is she alright? Yup. Do you have any idea where she is? Could you please get me a pass to the Empire? Please, I need to see her. She's like a sister to me. Calm down, please. Let's go back and see what happens. Are you okay with it? Kiba nodded and returned to Naruto's house. Wow, that went much better than I expected. He's far too forgiving for his own good. Kiba was in for a surprise when they arrived at the house. A woman dressed as the Empress, whom he assumed was Hinata, was tapping her foot angrily on the ground. Naruto, may I inquire as to why you left with Kiba? I'm expecting a convincing response. Well, he stated that he wished to converse and where? He's already hit you several times, and he could do it again. Do you realize it's kind of my job to listen to everyone? Is that a reason to take reckless risks? Kiba may have hit me, but he never tried to kill me, Hina-chan. I assure you that I am safe. Hinata's face became concerned. I've known Naruto long enough to know what he's capable of. Kiba sighed deeply, finally drawing Hinata's gaze to him. I've really screwed up big time, haven't I? Yes, you have, Kiba. And while Naruto is an infinitely forgiving idiot, hey, I'm not. Give me one reason why I shouldn't annihilate you. Kiba remained silent as he considered his response. He then sighed and prepared to face judgment. I don't own any. You have every right to be angry at me or to despise me. If it were just me, I'd let you kill me. But I'm engaged, so I can't really let you do that. I'm sure you'll never forgive me, and I deserve it. Just sorry. Kiba kept his gaze fixed on the ground, not daring to look her in the eyes. Hinata, for her part, was still affected by her family's reconciliation, so she decided not to be hasty and to think about it carefully before making a decision. I'll consider it. Now, Naruto-kun, I believe you should come inside because father is still skeptical of our future marital situation. Naruto laughed as he followed his soon-to-be wife into the house. Hinata poked her head through the door as an afterthought and looked at Kiba. There are no longer any reasons to keep who I am hidden from others. She then went back into the house. Kiba paused for a moment, sighed, and resumed his walk back towards the hotel where the Konoha delegation was staying. Then something struck him. What exactly does she mean by future marital situation? She is married to Fu. Wait, she said our. What do you mean? Kiba came to a halt, stunned. He then shrugged and referred to it as karmic reward. He passed the bridge on his way back and noticed a fast-moving speck running towards him. Squinting, he noticed silver hair and a Konoha headband. As Kakashi approached, he let out a mighty roar. My porn sense is tickling. The gray-haired Jonin sped past a wide-eyed Kiba, nearly knocking the Inuzuka off his feet. Looking over his shoulder at the vanishing form of Kakashi, Kiba wondered why all the experienced Jonin he knew had to be so unique. He resumed his walk, shaking his head. After what he had heard and seen, he didn't pay attention when a green blur crossed the bridge at high speed, yelling something about a tingling youth sense. WHAAT. Sekiro was the name. Kiba turned to face the assembled Konoha delegation, and more specifically, his friends, who had drifted away due to his treatment of Naruto. You heard me correctly. Hinata is the Empress, and she intends to marry Naruto and most likely share him with Fu-sama. Tenten's eyes were the size of plates. Choji's bag of chips had fallen. Shino simply stood there, as unreadable as ever. Lee was in tears, sprouting nonsense about the flames of youth. Shikamaru didn't seem surprised at all. And Sasuke, the Uchiha, was desperately attempting to conceal himself in the closet, and failing miserably. What are you up to, Sasuke? Hiding. She'll skin me alive if she finds me. She's going to be mad at me. Don't even call me that. Kiba laughed at the man with the duck hair. He was amusing at times, acting stupidly. It was like having Naruto around again, but not as much fun as he was. Sekiro gave him a glare as if she could read his mind. Wait a second, how did you find out? Kiba decided that avoiding the question would be foolish, so he answered directly. I went to speak with him. A chance encounter earlier this week opened my eyes, so I went to apologize in a roundabout way. A deafening silence descended on the audience. Hiba and Yuzuka was not the type to publicly admit his flaws. For him to admit this in front of them, he must have felt extremely guilty. Sasuke stopped trying to hide because it was so shocking. Hiba was getting nervous, so he mentally blessed the bird that was approaching, while wondering why it sounded almost like screaming Ma. A blur of gray and green smashed through the window and into the wall, leaving a dent. A completely green blur did the same thing through the other window of the room and met the same wall before the wide-eyed crowd could take a closer look. All of this happened in less than 2 seconds. They could see it was Hade, Kakashi, and Madogai now that both blurs were somewhat static. And less than a second later, 2 furious voices filled with feminine righteousness yelled in rage. "And don't you 2 freaks come any close to our man again." The Leaf Assembly remained silent as the 2 teachers groaningly stood up. Damn, and it's known as the gentle fist. It's anything but gentle. This vibrant mint flower, it truly packs a punch. Tsunade, still shocked to learn that Hinata was alive, addressed them angrily. "All right, why are you 2 here? My porn sense was on fire. My sense of youth was tingling. My vexing sense is tingling." Shikamaru sighed. What the hell happened? Hiba was interrupted. Am I the only one who doesn't have a tingly sixth sense? Choji slowly raised his hand after a few moments of silence. My stomach tingles. So, here's chapter 6, the final chapter of this arc story thingy. Anyway, the epilogue will come next, and if enough people request it, I'll post chapters on previous events. You may have thought I was pulling a Kishimoto on you at one point, but please forgive me, I will not do it again. Also, this is my first real attempt at a battle scene, so please give your feedback on what worked and what could be improved. Ino smiled devilishly as she regained control of herself. She muttered under her breath, an evil glint in her eyes. My sense of gossip is tingling. Gossips on an Empress's sex life would be my crowning achievement. She snatched Kakashi and Guy and tossed them on an empty couch before taking her place in the doorway. No one is leaving this room until I have a complete report on these 3's possible activities. I'm looking for gossip. Tsunade stood up and walked to the door, sighing. She came to a halt in front of her fellow blonde and challenged the youngster with a glare. It didn't take long for Ino to shift to the side, saluting and making way for the Hokage. Tsunade took the civilized person's exit with a smile. She could have used the window, but she thought it was inappropriate for Cage. She decided to forego any dignity and sped to Naruto's house after leaving the hotel. She was there in less than a minute because the shack wasn't that far inland and she knew the way. She approached the door cautiously but hesitated before knocking. "Do you have anything on your mind, Haim?" Looking up, she noticed Jiraiya in a tree, leaning against the trunk and standing on a branch. "You already know what's on my mind." I assumed she was no longer alive, but she isn't. Yes, and I'm grateful for it. But I can't help but think, what if she holds me accountable? There's only one way to find out. Tsunade knocked and nodded. After a brief moment, the door slid open to reveal an expressionless Hinata. The former heiress's face relaxed as soon as she saw the Hokage. "Oh, it's you, Tsunade-sama. Please enter." The blonde nodded and entered the house, then the living room. Hayashi was sitting on a couch, more shocked than she had ever seen him, with Hanabi patting one of his hands and Fu snickering on the other side. "What's the matter, old man? There are plenty of people who would love to have 2 in-laws with the same child, so please stop gaping." Of course, this did nothing to help the poor clan head's situation, but it did increase Fu's laughter, and Tsunade couldn't help but smirk at the spectacle. Hinata walked past her and sat in Naruto's lap, the blonde being seated in an armchair at the time, and Neji, who was leaning against a wall, was looking around with a puzzled expression. Hinata sat down and turned to face her consort. "What did I say about teasing father, Fu-chan? He is a very traditional man. Will you please give him some time to accept the concept?" Yeah, sorry, couldn't help myself." Hinata returned her gaze to Tsunade, who was still standing in the doorway, satisfied with the answer. "Why don't you take a seat, Tsunade-sama?" Hinata said, motioning for a free armchair, most likely the one Hinata had been sitting in. With a nod, the slug princess sat in the chair, her gaze fixed on Hayashi. "How long has he been that way?" Perhaps a minute or 2. "Don't worry, he'll change his mind. He was stunned for an entire day when his mother told him she was pregnant with Hanabi. I see you're here by yourself. Is this a social visit?" Tsunade took a deep breath to calm herself. "Hinata, I apologize for exiling me. It's not your fault. You were dealing with pain the way you were used to. It was the fault of the Hyuga elders, who took advantage of it, and they paid for it, despite the fact that I believe they should have suffered more. So, whatever is done is done." Tsunade nodded, relieved, but she couldn't relax. The guilt just wouldn't go away. Which was to be expected. She had lived with it for far too long for it to disappear with a few words. She sighed and turned to face Naruto. The blonde was contentedly resting his chin on the Empress' shoulder. He had never looked happier. And Tsunade was relieved to see that things were improving for him. She returned her attention to Hinata and made a quick decision. Do I understand you're going to marry Naruto? Well, we intend to take our time before that, but it is planned. He proposed to both of us this afternoon. And he has already purchased the rings. Hey, my girls deserve nothing but the best, Naruto exclaimed with his trademark smile, prompting Hinata and Fu to smile and blush. I see, Tsunade said with a smile on her lips. Well, I'd like to be able to visit the knucklehead when he lives in the Empire, and I'm sure I'm not the only one. And there's also the matter of your friends. I think they'll want to be at the wedding and be able to visit from time to time. Nothing a good little treaty can't fix. I'd prefer to wait until tomorrow to negotiate because I'd like to spend some time with my soon-to-be husband. Certainly, Tsunade grinned. I can understand how much you want to keep him close after being apart from him for 6 years. Hinata nodded and smiled. The evening was spent talking lightly and attempting, with little success, to get Hayashi over his shock. Jiraiya quickly joined the group after Hinata began cooking dinner with Naruto's assistants. Hinata, Fu, and Naruto awoke early the next morning to prepare for the day. Fu decided to accompany Hinata to the negotiation, and Naruto decided to go for a walk on the beach since his 2 lovely ladies were gone. The blonde was in a great mood this morning, and the beautiful scenery didn't dampen his spirits. The waves were gently crashing on the sand. The sky was a lovely shade of blue, and there were few clouds. He could see one of the many boats that came to the island on the horizon, a very rare sight from this beach. Away from all maritime roads, he realized he'd have to inform the Raikage and Tsuchikage to halt the search. He was so engrossed in his own little world that when the canister started whistling, it was too late. It took some time for Naruto's disappearance to be noticed, but once it did, Weeb descended into chaos, with everyone looking for the young man who had so easily brought peace. Finally, shortly after noon, a canister was discovered on a beach near the north of the island, and the entire Konoha, Suna, and Imperial parties converged on the beach to look for clues. The canister bore the emblem of a pirate gang known for kidnapping nobles and demanding ransom. Tsunade muttered under her breath, "No one knows what harbor these pirates used, and they operated along the entire coast, meaning they didn't even have ways to narrow the search." Looking at Hinata and Fu as they conversed silently, she wondered what was going through their minds. They had changed out of their formal yukata and into battle gear as soon as Naruto was reported missing. Fu's shirt now had 3 small plates the same color as her chest plate on top of each sleeve, and her Haori now had 2 equally green pauldrons shaped as horn beetle heads. The blonde Cage noting with interest that her armor seemed sturdier. While impressive, the change didn't seem out of place. She'd already been seen in battle gear, and this was just a little heavier. Hinata, on the other hand, looked a little different. She was now dressed in a long dark blue kimono top that opened past the belt to reveal matching pants. Her breastplate was dark purple, with pauldrons shaped like dragon heads resting on her shoulders and 3 purple plates resting on her sleeves just below them. The outfit was completed by a golden circlet depicting a dragon clutching the pearl of wisdom in its talons, which rested on her brow. When they finished talking, Hinata took a few steps forward and began pulsing with energy, drawing the attention of everyone on the beach. Her head sprouted red ghostly antlers resembling those of a deer, and dark red markings appeared around her eyes, almost like a blood-red fire spreading on the skin around her eyes. She then took a step closer to where the canister had been discovered and kneeled. She focused for a split second before snapping her head up and looking straight ahead, to the north. "Did you get it?" Fu inquired, her voice concerned. "Yes, his chakra path points north." The Imperial couple began to walk towards the sea after Fu nodded. "Wait a second, Tsunade is her name. You have no idea where their base is. They have easily 200 men, and you will have no backup, not to mention the distance you'd have to travel." They both turned their heads to face her, a confident grin on their faces. "We've already traveled longer distances, and if the Sage Mode doesn't betray me, which it never does, they'll be on Whirlpool Island." Hinata responded. "Please excuse us now," said Fu. "We must reclaim our man and demonstrate why we were feared in the West." Before anyone else could say anything, their chakra flared, revealing 2 insect wings on Fu's back and a thin cloak of red chakra around Hinata. They were gone in an instant, leaving only 2 trails of raised water in their wake. They were running or flying at never-before-seen speeds, tearing through the air at such high speeds that they had to use chakra to force air into their lungs and keep their bodies together, something made slightly easier by the natural or demonic chakra flowing through their bodies. But they didn't care. They had a goal, and it was getting closer. They finally saw their goal after a full hour of running at such frightening speed. Whirlpool. They began to slow as they got closer, allowing the tunnel vision effect to fade slightly. The closer they got, the more they could see an unusual harbor made of wooden structures gathered in a stone fortress, most likely raised with ninjutsu. Fu began weaving through hand seals, employing her most potent original technique, the most potent Raiten technique ever devised. As she held the final seal, a ball of lightning formed in front of her mouth, quickly growing in size until it was the same size as her head. Then suddenly shrank and she closed her mouth around it. Her cheeks puffed up, and she let loose the closest thing to a Baijudama a human could make. The compressed ball of lightning flew through the air at even faster than they did, colliding with the fortress's wall. The wall exploded inward in a great bolt of lightning, peppering the buildings behind it with stone fragments, killing many and deafening the survivors. Fu sped through the dust cloud, dispersing her wings and unsealing her bow before crashing to the ground, a concentrated wave of lightning surrounding her to cover her entrance. Hinata soon followed her. Looking around, they noticed pirates and the occasional deserter encircling them. A large portion of them were still deaf, and they looked at them with fear in their eyes. They couldn't understand what was going on. Then they realized there were only 2 women attacking them, and they assumed the attack that breached the wall had to have depleted a large portion of their reserves. They began to regain confidence. Hinata regarded them with scorn. She had fought far more deserving men during the war, and she was offended that these fools thought they could fight them. She smiled as she turned to face her consort. "Could you please look after them, my dear?" "Yeah, but why? You've always known better than I do how to entertain this type of audience, love. Just don't go overboard." Yeah, I get it. I'll leave the island mostly intact." Hinata began walking towards the fortress's entrance with a smirk on her face. When a group of thugs moved to block her path, she simply continued walking, her feet moving in a paced rhythm, her confident grin never leaving her face. When the first thug got close enough, she swiped her right hand upward, starting at her left hip and slashing diagonally, instantly conjuring a sword construct made of natural energy. She swerved to the side as the man died, avoiding the spray of blood. She resumed her walk calmly, noting with amusement that the other had stopped their charge when they saw their comrade's death. She took 3 more steps before they charged again, this time all at once. Her smile remained as about 20 men charged at her with various weapons. She calmly approached the charging men, summoning a second sword. She beheaded it by twirling one of her swords, spinning the tip around the same sword before slamming the flat of the blade on the butt of the recently shortened spear, sending it sailing through the air and the spear wielder's skull. She spun to the left, avoiding a Tetsubo strike, beheading the wielder, then ducked under a sword slash, sidestepping and rising as she ran both her blades across her enemy's belly, disemboweling him. She cut the arms of a bulky axe wielder with one sword while parrying a giant, causing the big and heavy weapon, raised high, to fall on his head with a wet cracking sound. She ran through the sword wielder before resuming her walk, spinning to avoid the blood gushing from the severed arms of the falling body. She summoned 5 throwing knife constructs from her left blade and sent them towards her assailants, killing 1 man for each knife before catching the sword. She let the knives dissolve because she no longer needed them. A man approached her with a knife in each hand, certain he could kill her quickly. Hinata sidestepped him, allowing him to run on her blade as it cut through him, leaving the 2 halves to fall to the ground. A woman charged at her, one of the few female pirates, nunchaku spinning wildly in her hands. She attacked with her left, only for Hinata to effortlessly cut through the chain, allowing the weighted end to sail straight into the face of one of her allies attempting to surround her, killing the man. Hinata had spun around her, running her sword across her throat before the shocked woman could recover. She turned her attention to the other thugs in front of her, leaving the woman to bleed out. 12 dead in 10 steps in 20 seconds, and she hadn't even been hit by a droplet of blood. Screams of pain, agony, and fear could be heard in the background, as well as explosions of fire and thunder. Looking closely at the opposition, she noticed fear and confusion. It was a mix she was familiar with, having seen it on the faces of elite guards when she led a small strike force to take out annoying warlords during the war. She dashed forward, a vicious smile on her face. Her terrified adversaries were caught off guard and were unable to react in time. She cut cleanly through their necks as she flew past the two first. She threw one of her blades into the head of a bandit to her left, then grabbed the one closer to her and threw him onto the sword of one of his comrades, using the distraction to quickly stab both men through the hearts. There were 4 men left. They were all shaking in fear, and it was obvious that they had already sullied themselves. Hinata was upon them with another dash, summoning a new sword and using both to cleave 2 bandits in half at the midsection before jumping high to avoid the blood. As she approached one of the last 2 bandits, he turned to run, not realizing it was pointless. Hinata, seeing no reason to tire herself, used the man's neck as a springboard, propelling herself with a chakra pulse, breaking his neck in the process, before slamming her right foot into the face of the last man, launching herself into a backflip as the man went sailing into and through the wooden wall of a nearby building. Hinata entered the fortress after the road was cleared. Naruto stared at the door. He was in a cell with no windows, and judging by the stench of blood and sex, the previous inhabitant had a particularly unpleasant stay, and was a woman. He had awoken an hour before and had carefully considered his options. He had enough time before losing consciousness to notice the canister and recognize the symbol. He was aware of these pirates and had no doubt that they would kill him if they did not get what they desired. Or, at the very least, they'd try, especially given the loud explosion that had shook the place just a minute before. He sighed as he realized there was only one option left. He would have to fight. He sunk into himself, sitting on the floor, to face his tenant. As he approached the mighty cage, his gaze locked with the red eyes staring at him with interest. "I need your assistance, Hirama." Behind the gates, a sinister grin appeared. "It's high time you asked, Kit." For what felt like the 100th time today, Yejiro Isayama sighed. The idiots up there had managed to blow up the armory. Once more, the hierarchy needed to realize how stupid it was to entrust explosive tags to barely educated thugs. He was one of the few ninja on the pirate fleet and, to be honest, he wished he wasn't. He was from Kiri, but he had deserted to stay with one of his friends. It was too late to turn back when the guy tried to kill him for fun. His life had been a living hell since then, always on the run, always fighting with scum to survive, always being pursued by the Hunter Corp and other deserters looking to cash in on the small bounty. His thoughts returned to the prisoner. He'd been sent to see if he was still alive after the explosion. This boy, Naruto, he thought was his name, was known throughout the elemental nations as a mediator and peacemaker. A great man, the leader, whose name he couldn't recall, claimed it would be their biggest hit and would bring in a lot of money. But the guy was so bloodthirsty that he couldn't bear the thought of letting the boy leave the island alive. This Naruto would die on this island, most likely in his cell, just like the girl who came before him. What a waste. Eijiro cursed his luck once more. If he hadn't been sick last week, he could have gone on a raid and slipped by, then rushed to Wave to warn them before setting off to the new empire and starting over. But that wasn't going to happen anytime soon. Eijiro's heart rate dropped even further. He'd seen too much meaningless death, too many innocent people killed for the sake of a few sick men. His hands were also blood-stained. "Why, sir?" A crimson cough splattered on his blue sleeve. "I've done well." The little girl collapsed, her empty eyes still locked on his, her face still expressionless. Eijiro fought back tears. This little girl had been kind and generous to him, providing him with food and a place to sleep for the night. However, her village was attacked, and he was forced to fight alongside the other pirates, and he'd killed her without even realizing it at the time. They didn't even know each other's names, but she was a symbol of purity to him. She was his only unjustified killing, and it would always haunt him, one he'd never forgive himself for. He took solace, as he had so many times before, in the fact that he could at least bury her. He opened the cell door with yet another sigh, but as soon as the door opened, he felt a sharp pain in his chest. He could only see a fox mask and the cold blue eyes hidden behind it. He let out a soft chuckle. He was on his deathbed. "It appears that our little hermit is a little more." As the young man drew Eijiro into the cell, his hand remained buried in his chest. Eijiro spoke before Naruto could. "At the end of the corridor, there are 5 guards. A shinobi. Ikoff isn't particularly talented. Then there's Koff the mess, and no one should be there. They ate about an hour ago. After that, Koff W. Keep an eye out for Koff the lead guy when you enter the throne room. He used to be an Iwa Jonin. Koff Bastard has 3 other Jonin-level deserters. Koff, if you need weapons, I've got some kunai and shuriken, as well as a couple of tags." For a few moments, the hermit looked at him. "Why are you assisting me?" "Because your worth is greater than mine." If you cough, get out of there, cough. I'll have done one good thing in my pathetic life. Now hurry up before I cough kick your $sign for destroying my shirt. Ijiro handed his weapons to the young hermit with a bloodied smile. Before leaving the room, Naruto looked at him again, paused for a second, then nodded gratefully before leaving. Screams of surprise and a few wet gurgles informed Ijiro that the child had survived. Darkness descended on him gradually. He could feel himself fading away, but he was at peace. In the distance, he heard the little girl again. Okay, Nai-san, stop sleeping. You said we were going to play ninja. Sujiro Hashimoto was having a terrible day. Even though the abduction of the hermit had gone off without a hitch, an unknown force was now attacking his base. He'd had to barricade himself in the throne room with his guards and wait for the enemy. He knew nothing about them, not their numbers, not their abilities, and certainly not their goal. Sujiro despised only one thing more than a day without blood, and that was uncertainty. He had summoned shinobi from all over the base to defend the throne room, the easiest position to hold in the fortress, with only one way out. So far, only the dead, those trapped in the courtyard, and these two idiots in the prison had failed to report. Outside the room, there was screaming, first screams of anger and hatred, then roars of techniques converging in a closed space. A brief moment of silence. Sujiro's face turned pale as a cacophony of pained and terrified screams mixed with the sound of a blade tearing through flesh. Hinata was spitting, disemboweling a man and then running a kunoichi through him. She jumped to avoid a sword strike before kicking the man in the head, sending a burst of chakra into his brain. Spinning in midair, she transformed her swords into throwing knives, which she hurled at the gathered shinobi, too quickly for them to avoid. Killing 3 more, she landed behind a man, summoning 2 new swords and cleaving him in half while spinning and beheading another. Stepping to the side, she let a water jutsu pass through her and slam an opponent into a wall, cracking it and snapping the man's spine. She thrust into the 2 men approaching from behind before dashing forward, taking 2 heads in the process before twirling her swords back into their normal position and relieving a man of his arms and piercing his heart. She punched him into the one behind him, crushing him against the wall. 17. It was laughable that she could be stopped by only 17 semi-professional shinobi. She felt almost insulted, but she didn't have time to warn about her arrival, so it wasn't as much fun as it could have been. She smiled sweetly at the last remaining ninja, causing the already trembling man to take a few steps back, ending up pressed against the door. He turned his head, surprised, to see what was impeding his retreat. Hinata was waiting for him when he turned his head back, a savage smile on her face as she delivered a powerful kick to his chest, causing his ribs to collapse, crushing his heart, and throwing him through the door. The Empress entered the room calmly, her face unmarked by blood. When he saw what had happened to his troops, the man in front of the throne paled. He couldn't believe a single girl could have slaughtered so many veterans. She had to be at least cage level. Then she spoke. You must either stand down and surrender or commit suicide. Failure to comply will result in a grisly death. Sujiro hardened his resolve as he met the gaze of his 3 guards. She was the only one of the 4. The idiots in the corridor were nothing more than cannon fodder, a bunch of talentless losers who he had beaten. So what if she'd murdered them? He'd just have to kill her before he could have his fun with her and rebuild his pirate band. Who the fuck do you think you are, bitch, to order us around? He yelled, pleased with the assurance in his voice. But it fell away when she chuckled darkly. I am the Empress. When Sujiro realized who was standing in front of him, the air around him grew cold. My word. She vanished in an instant, reappearing in front of one of his guards, her swords in his guts. His law. She spun her swords in her hands, severing the man's arms at the shoulder before beheading him and back-flipping out of reach, all before a drop of blood could escape from the wounds. At this point, one of the walls exploded, sending stone shrapnel into the room. Sujiro grabbed one of his surprised bodyguards and used him as a shield for both himself and the remaining bodyguard, leaving the poor lad he was holding peppered with stone fragments. He saw a scene from one of his worst nightmares when he finally let go of the body. Fu stood in the opening, the ruins of the fortress burning in the background as columns of black smoke rose from the harbor. He noticed numerous red stains in the courtyard. While Hinata was spotless, Fu hadn't bothered to avoid the blood splatters, and a portion of her clothing was stained red, and the vital liquid was slowly dripping from her bow staff. I love killing cannon fodder. It's so much fun. They have no idea what hit them. Sujiro realized he was no longer alive. Even he had heard of the War Master, and after meeting her, he believed the rumors that she had demonic blood, because only a demon could slaughter so many men and escape unscathed. But life clearly didn't think he had enough and decided to make his day worse by exploding as a limb of blood-red chakra shot through it, grabbing his last guard and corroding him to death as he howled blood-curdling screams of agony. Naruto strode calmly through the remains of the door, his chakra cloak blood-red, a kitsune mask covering his face. Fu and Hinata were taken aback by his use of chakra, but they were relieved to see him alive and well. Naruto was relieved to see that his two lovely ladies had come to his aid. He simply moved to stand alongside Hinata and Fu without saying anything. Sejiro, who was now completely stunned, simply collapsed on the throne, staring at the three beings in front of him. Who are you monsters? Naruto began. Continuing Fu. Shinobi. Hinata concluded. As Fu and Hinata went through hand seals at breakneck speed, Naruto began gathering chakra. They all finished at once, unleashing their techniques on him. Fox Fury, Katen. Dragon's Rage, Katen. Seven Winds Blade Futon. The techniques merged into one pillar of bright blue flames, instantly incinerating Sejiro and partially melting the throne. They took a moment to consider their work before turning to the gaping hole in the wall and walking out and down the wall. So, Naru-kun, do you have anything to tell us? Heh, I was hoping I wouldn't have to use Kurama's chakra again. Furthermore, if it becomes known that I can use chakra, it may cause problems. Can you use chakra other than Kyubi's? There was a brief pause. I might as well come clean now. Just so you know, I had intended to inform you. Nobody knows, but Kurama trashed the seal on me about 3 years ago when I befriended him. It was painful and time-consuming, but it was completed. And, to be honest, if the jerk who sealed me knew what he was doing, it would have been irreversible. Fu came to a halt in her tracks. When the other two turned to see what was wrong, they noticed a perverted grin and a small trickle of blood running down her nose. Can you use shadow clones again? When Hinata and Naruto realized what she had in mind, they both suffered from a minor nosebleed. Hinata then grabbed Fu's arm and dragged her to the center of the courtyard, with Naruto close behind. When she arrived, she summoned a dragon and asked him to fly them back to Wave. Tsunade and the Suna and Konoha delegations had remained on the beach, hoping that Hinata and Fu had been successful. Everyone gathered when the dragon appeared to see how many people were on its head. Of course, the wise ones inquired of the Hyuga. To see further, Hayashi activated his Byakugan and slightly overcharged it. After a quick glance, he deactivated his eyes to avoid damage and sighed relievedly. What does that mean, Hayashi? Tsunade wasn't sure whether she should be optimistic or pessimistic. It appears that I will continue to have grandchildren, was Hayashi's response, but it was clear enough for everyone to understand, and many applauded. When the dragon was close enough for the three people to jump, there were a few more cheers as they landed on the beach. But the mood was slightly dampened by the amount of blood on Fu's clothing. After the entire situation was explained, including Naruto's use of chakra, everyone calmed down and let the three go to Naruto's house for a well-deserved rest and meal. 15 years had passed. 15 years of tranquility. Naruto was now Emperor Consort, the most coveted man in the world, and a successful author of action literature. He was looking at his wives and children from the outer walkway of their inner garden right now. He had Hikari and Genji with him, both wielding the Byakugan. Hikari, 9 years old, looked like a miniature Hinata, with blonde hair and her father's bubbly personality. But she had inherited her mother's intelligence. Genji, on the other hand, was a 7-year-old blue-haired version of Naruto with some Hyuga ancestry, calm and highly intelligent, and an unhealthy love of pranks. He had 3 children with Fu. Asaki, the firstborn and oldest of the 5, was a 10-year-old boy who had inherited both of his parents' enthusiasm and joy, making him a very lively child and an excellent brother, always willing to assist his younger siblings. He had his mother's orange eyes and blonde straight hair, and his face was almost a carbon copy of his father's when he was a child. Hiru and Keiko, his 6-year-old twins, came next. Hiru was a cheerful child with the face of his parents, with Fu's tan skin and hair color but his father's unruly hair. His eyes belonged to his mother, but his smile belonged to Uzumaki. Keiko resembled her brother, with the exception that her eyes were blue. Aside from that, she was slightly calmer than Hiru, but only slightly. She was also more responsible in some ways, if you can call a 6-year-old responsible. The 5 were currently running around, laughing and playing. It's been a very peaceful day. They hadn't yet pulled a prank. Naruto smiled fondly at his family, something he had desired his entire life but never imagined would come to him in such a way. The world was at peace as well. He had maintained his position as a reliable mediator and had brought peace to the elemental nations. It didn't take long for them to request integration into the empire after that. The entire continent was now united and at peace. However, they couldn't afford to be completely at peace. Foreign nations weren't as peaceful, and tales of wars reached them via merchants. For the time being, they appeared content to fight among themselves, with each continent serving as an arena. But no one knew when they would seek conquest from others or when their wars would spill over on them. As a result, they maintained a strong military structure. Furthermore, it aided in dealing with bandits. The knowledge of his chakra ability had spread, and despite his fears, it had not caused any problems. Well, there was that one time when he was assisting Gaara in negotiating with that Terumi guy from Kiri. After that, he had learned never to leave shadow clones at the mercy of his girls when he was negotiating. It could be far too humiliating. Pulling himself out of his reverie, Naruto entered the garden, attracting the attention of the entire family. His children ran to him, squealing with delight at the sight of their father. They all started talking at the same time, babbling about their days, which caused Naruto to burst out laughing. Hey, not at the same time, I don't get it. Come on, let's go see your mothers. Okay, of course. The children all happily agreed, running back to their mothers, the younger racing against each other to see who would get to hug first. Naruto smiled amusedly as he shook his head. While Fu distracted the children, Hinata sent a curious glance toward Naruto. It wasn't exactly like him to miss an occasion to hug his numerous children. The blonde tapped the side of his head softly, prompting her to activate her Byakugan. A knowing smile spread across her face as she spotted the people Naruto had sensed. Naruto sat happily among his family in the shade of a sakura tree with his wives and children. Genji, being the first to reach his lap, was granted the honor of being the first to speak about his day, mostly complaining about the tedious material he had to learn. The family's attention was drawn to the garden's entrance when 5-year-old Emiko Hyuga Tobai ran in, calling out to her cousins. Almost instantly, the 5 Uzumaki children surrounded their cousin, hugging her and excitedly conversing with her. Emiko was soon followed by her parents, and the Imperial heir, Triple, went to greet them. What happened? We weren't expecting you until tomorrow. Left earlier? Naruto inquired. No, it was just that Emiko was impossible, always demanding that we go faster. She's very excited to see you. Konohamaru responded with a broad smile. They then turned to face their wives, who were engrossed in a heated debate punctuated by evil chuckles and sinister smiles. They're at it again. Amira had a heart attack the last time they had this kind of discussion. What were they up to this time? Koharu tried to convince the new daimyo that we should declare our independence. It didn't go well, but Hanabi-chan intends to punish her for undermining the Hokage's authority. I guess that's one more medical retirement then. Yup, I won't complain, but these 2 old geezers need to learn when to let go. The afternoon was spent watching the 6 children run around the garden, laughing at each other's big and small stories. Naruto felt at ease as he gazed at the setting sun, his children sound asleep in their parents' arms. Yes, the beginning was shaky as hell, but the ending is fantastic. The wonderful fairy tale. You are to surrender your petty kingdom to our Lord. If you do not, you will perish. You will give up your sinful practices and devilish sorcery, though, because the gods are on our side. Hinata scoffed at the fool who dared to speak to her in such a manner. He wore a long black robe with white shoulder pads bearing the crest of some foreign kingdom or church. He and his supporters had arrived a few days before, demanding to be heard, and now they're giving her orders. She rose from her throne and walked calmly toward them. Many people have tried to subdue me before you. They desired my wealth, power, and body. You are no exception. You, like them all, will fail. She created a crimson sword of natural energy, turning a lazy eye to one of the acolytes, and the superstitious outlanders looked at her in fear and hatred. Bring this message to your sovereign. The empire of the 6th path will not bow, and he will be crushed if he dares to attack. As you uncover your leader's head, tell him exactly what I said. That is not possible. Diplomatic immunity. The man babbled, suddenly terrified. Hinata's laughter cut him off. I am a kunoichi, and I have killed thousands of people. One small priest will not make a difference. You forgot one thing about diplomatic immunity. She moved as quickly as lightning to remove the man's head from his shoulders. I'm the Empress, and my word is law.
So this was the end of this movie. I hope you enjoyed it. If you have any suggestion, please share it in the comment. Till then, Weeb offline.